Let's get the Government Operations Committee, I'll call it to order. We have a quorum. Representative, do we have minutes from last meeting? Or? We don't have minutes, okay. First bill on our agenda today is House File 2932, Representative Liebling. And I will move that House 2932 be re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Finance.
Oh.
And I understand there's an amendment.
No, Mr. Chair, I don't think that's where it's going. These are not finance provisions, probably Health and Human Services policy.
By Representative Liebling, I've been being told that there could possibly be finance implications, and so therefore we need to send it there.
Well, Mr. Chair, maybe as we go through it, we could take care of some of that, because as far as, if I could, Mr. Chair, these are provisions that are that are being carried in the HHS omnibus policy omnibus bill. And so we aren't able to carry anything there that has a cost, and these are the provisions that are GovOps provisions for this committee to vet and discuss, but there really should not be anything here that carries a cost.
Okay, we can change the amendment. We can change the amendment at the end. We'll go through this. I see two amendments here. Are they both your amendments? A2 and a 918 amendment.
No, Mr. Chair, I don't.
Oh, I said there's a technical. The A2 is a technical amendment. I'm being told to the 918. So let's.
I don't have that, Mr. Chair. Oh.
Okay, I've moved 2932, and I'll move the A14-0918 amendment to put the bill in the order that the author wants. All those in favor of the 918 amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. The aye has it. And now the A2 amendment to the technical amendment to correct the all in favor of the A2 amendment to put the bill in the order the author needs it. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The aye has it. Representative Liebling, describe your bill.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And I know this is a lot of this is technical stuff for early in the morning at the end of a very long week. But as I was telling the chair, these are provisions that are being carried in the they're the GovOps pieces of bills that are in the HHS policy omnibus bill. And as I walk through, some of them are sort of taken care of already. So as we've been assembling our omnibus bill, we've been putting aside provisions that this committee really should vet and that we wanted to get your advice on.
And Representative Liebling, I've got a memo here that the bills, the parts of the bill that are pertinent to us are the Section 1 on page 1, Section 2, Subdivision 3, Section 3, on page 9, Section 6, and Section 8. If that's what you... So members, if we can limit ourselves to that. You want me to repeat those, Representative Liebling?
I have the memo.
Okay.
Staff gave me the memo. Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, members, this first section, Section 1, page 1, actually is a provision that was deleted in the Civil Law Committee, so we don't need to be concerned about that. It's been taken out. It's not going to be in the omnibus policy bill. So if the committee wants to delete that here as well, that would be fine. But regardless, it's not, that piece is not going to go forward, so the committee doesn't need to waste any time on that piece.
So I'll move that on page 1, and we're talking the delete all amendment, the delete all amendment. So page 1 of the delete all amendment, delete section 1.
Exactly, Mr. Chair.
All those in favor of that, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Then the next section would be section 2.
Okay, Section 2 of the bill, members, pertains to the prescription monitoring program, and just to let people know, the bill itself, the larger provision, has been thoroughly vetted in other committees, except, and it is before this committee because we're making some changes to, for one thing, what was formerly an advisory committee is being moved, that expired, is being changed into a task force here that will provide ongoing advice to the HPSP, or to this Prescription Monitoring Program Board. So just for a little background, the Prescription Monitoring Program is a program of the Board of Pharmacy where they're trying to get at the problem of opiate abuse by giving healthcare providers a way to check if somebody's doctor shopping. And I know a few of you who, I know Representative Pugh, who's in the Civil Law Committee, heard a great deal about this the other night, but this is the GovOps piece, and there's only, so I think that's why it's in front of this committee, is for that issue, and maybe if the committee has questions about why that's being done, my note here says that Mr. Shepard might be able to help explain
Representative Liebling, it looks to me like you're changing it from I think the reason why it's before is because you're changing it from an advisory committee to a task force.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
And I guess that's, and you're taking away the sunset on it.
Correct.
Members, any questions on that portion? Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I would like someone to explain this monitoring program. I don't know anything about it. It sounds a little bit more hefty when it's a monitoring program versus a reporting system. Could you just talk a little bit about why and what that means, how the process is on that?
Representative Pepin. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Pepin, this is a program that's been in place for a number of years, a program of the Board of Pharmacy, as I said. It's a program that's an attempt to, it basically collects data, very sensitive data, on individuals when they get a prescription for an opiate, and this is reported into a database. We had a discussion on this in civil law. Representative Holberg's very concerned about this program, as am I, and in fact the program came forward with a pretty broad request to expand what they do and what they collect and how they use it, and I know the Senate wants to do that, and I am very, very cautious on this, and we made some changes in civil law to pare this down because, yes, it is a program that collects sensitive information, that wants to use that information on individuals, and I think if we really open that up here, we could be here a long time, but believe me, in the House here, bipartisanly, we are very much together on this, on restricting this, making sure that this data, and Representative Holberg, frankly, in that committee in civil law said she wants the program to justify its very existence, and so do I. So we're being very careful about this, but the Senate is pushing for what I would consider a major expansion of the program. So this will be, I know, a big topic in the conference committee, but the provision that's here today really doesn't, is much narrower than that. But, this, believe me, if this isn't something that the House wants to do, we won't be doing it. So I don't think there's
Liebling, I see here it's the section. You've added the line into it. It is governed by Section 15.059. What is that section, and what does that do? Do you know, or is that narrow it down its focus, or
where
on line 3.10 and 11 of the amendment? Maybe Mr. Shepard can help.
Maybe Mr. Shepard can help. I don't recall that one.
Mr. Chair and Representative Liebling and members, the reference to Section 15.059 for a task force means that members of advisory task forces do not receive per diem, but they are eligible for expense reimbursement. The provisions of that section also provide that let me just see. So it would be and that members appointed to the task force's servant until the expiration date of the task force The provision that says notwithstanding 15.059, the task force shall not expire under is most under under 15.0 there is no expiration date in section 15.059 subdivision 5 anymore. That expiration date expired in 2009. So this reference doesn't have a strong meaning right now. The typical law for saying a task force is governed by section 15.059 would be that task forces expire every 2 years, but they can be recreated by the person with authority to create it in the first place.
So Representative Liebling, Representative Pepin.
Thank you. I just have a follow-up question for Mr. Shepherd. So if the task force never doesn't expire in this bill, then does that mean if you're appointed to the task force, then that your term doesn't expire?
Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Chair, members, the members appointed to task forces serve until the expiration date, but they can be removed at any time, not just for cause, but at the pleasure of the appointing authority. So the members would serve as long as the appointing authority wanted them to serve.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Shepherd, so I can't remember who the appointing authority is, but maybe it says here. I'm just trying to figure out who appoints, and then, do these people go on forever? Other than for just cause, is there a way to rotate who's on the task force?
Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Chair and Representative Pepin and members, the task force is appointed by the board, which is the Board of Pharmacy in this case, and the board would have the discretion to appoint and remove people at its pleasure. So it would have to follow the requirements that it have a representative of a professional medical association, a professional pharmacy association, but it would not need just cause to remove someone. It could remove them at pleasure.
But so someone could also serve for 20 years, perhaps, on the task force?
Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Chair and members, my understanding is that the members would serve until they were removed.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you. Representative Liebling, is that your intention, that you want them to be able to serve? Usually we have people, obviously there's some benefits to, to rotating terms, but is it do you want it to have folks go on for?
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Pepin. Representative Pepin, this started out as a bill that really came from the Board of Pharmacy, and my function has been kind of traffic cop to narrow it. So this language really was their language, and I don't really, frankly, I think this program, it's going to undergo a lot of scrutiny going forward, and, I don't see this as a thing just in perpetuity with the same group of people, because I think it will get scrutiny, but if it's your pleasure to put time limits, that's all fine with me. That's why I'm here.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Liebling. I would prefer that if there was some type of language that limits time. I don't know that there's probably time for Mr. Shepherd to write it up today, because it might take a little bit of work. I'll wait till he talks to me on that, okay?
Well, Mr. Chair.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Pepin. This, as I said at the outset, this is language that's going to be carried in the Omnibus Health and Human Services Policy Bill. So, certainly if you came up with something and wanted to offer it as a floor amendment or had language for me to bring to conference or something like that, I'd be happy to. I'm not an expert on the task force issues and all of that, and I'm happy to take this committee's advice.
Thank you, Representative Liebling. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Shepherd has an easy fix for it right now. I thought it would be more difficult, but of course our whizzes on staff here know much more than we do.
We always have good staff. Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Chair and members, Representative Pepin was interested in ensuring that there would be a regular review of the membership and reappointment. And if on page 3, if you deleted the sentence that begins after the period on line 10, where it says notwithstanding that subdivision, the task force does not expire. That would have the effect of making the task force subject to 15.059, which means it would be appointed for 2 years at a time, and if the board then wanted another one, it could appoint the same members or different members, but it would have to take action to do that.
So, Mr. Shepherd, we'd have to do, after the period on 3.10 of we're working on the delete all amendment, members. We'd also have to delete line 3.11.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair.
I'll move that, Mr. Chair.
So Representative Pepin moves that on line 3.10 of the delete all amendment, after the period, we delete, on line 3.10, we delete the line starting with notwithstanding, and on 3.11, we delete that line. I'm getting a shake of a head over here. Members, all in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The motion's approved. Representative Pelowski.
I'll pass, Mr. Chair. Representative Pepin beat me to it.
Representative Liebling. Then that's Section 3 of the bill. Section 6, what does that do?
Okay, Mr. Chair, I think we actually didn't get to Section 3 yet.
Or Section 3, page 9. Yep, you're right. We were in Section 2.
Okay, Section 3 of the bill is, if members recall, there was some press during the interim about some issues with the Board of Nursing, that there was concern that the Board of Nursing had allowed certain people who shouldn't have been continuing to practice to continue to practice, and so a lot of the work of my committee this session has been to try to address that issue and plug holes in their system, fill gaps so that people can't, if they're chemically dependent or have other issues, that we try our best to not allow those kinds of situations to present a risk to the public. So we're making various changes to the Health Professional Services Program, which is a program the health-related licensing boards use to help them deal with licensed professionals, licensed health professionals who have various kinds of issues that may impact their safety and practice. It could be chemical dependency, it could also be mental health issues, physical disability issues, and this is a program that monitors orders that are put in place for them to receive treatment. So it can be anything that ranges from suspending their practice for a period of time or causing them to only be allowed to practice under strict monitoring or having other conditions. So what we're doing here is changing the makeup of the groups that oversee that process. And what we're really trying to do, and really I'm happy to take the committee's advice on this again to see if this is something that people feel is workable the way we've set it up, but we're changing these two committees that oversee this program in order to integrate them a little bit better. We're making the right now it's the board, the executive directors of the health-related licensing boards, and we are making the oversight groups smaller and putting on a couple of members from the professional associations to try to have a little more, a better advice process, if you will, to this program that does this monitoring. So that is the portion, I believe, that's here in the delete all amendment.
Representative Pelowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Liebling, I'm looking at the language on 9.23 and 4, and it's an ambiguous statement there that says, shall be appointed by a means agreeable to the executive directors of the health-related licensing boards. It just seems to be wide open and provide them no direction whatsoever in law. I don't know what your thought is about that, but it doesn't seem to mean anything here today.
Representative Liebling.
Chair. Well, Mr. Chair and Representative Pelowski, the executive directors of the health-related licensing boards are a fairly cohesive group. They work together and they make a lot of decisions together. And so this bill is an attempt to, while we want to change the way this HPSP program is managed, because it's kind of it's sort of a program that's used by all of these boards. We also don't want to intrude too much into the decisions of the executive directors of the various health-related boards. And so we're intentionally leaving it to them to decide which of their members should be on, or which executive directors should be on this program committee. Now, they already kind of do this, because they already, right now, and actually what's before you might have been changed subsequently. There's some references to the Commissioner of Administration. That's all out. What the boards do now is they run this program, they house it in one or another of the licensing boards, and it changes periodically, and it's done all by agreement of these various boards. So they're used to working this way. They don't need us to tell them how exactly to pick who goes on and who stays off. So that's kind of the balance we're trying to strike here. And I realize you don't often see that language, but these are professionals who are used to working together and making kind of a joint decision across the licensing boards about how to do certain things related to this program. So we're trying to not intrude too much into how they decide which of them is going to sit on this particular committee.
Representative Pelowski. Thank you, Representative Liebling. If it works for you, it sounds like it works, but I could, just looking at it from where I am, it seems that, we could have lack of uncertainty for a group like that. Maybe you'd want to say something like would be ratified by a majority vote of that board, or something like that, after they go through their their process, whatever it is. Just a suggestion. It doesn't seem to mean anything, and if there is at a point in time at which there's some dissension among the board, I can see problems there.
I see Representative Liebling right taking notes. Representative Pepe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Liebling, in that section, I'm just wondering, it talks about on line 9.29, a program budget, and then I see in 10.8, it talks about hiring the program manager, but that part was old language. So I'm wondering, will there be new staff hired, or is it with existing staff, or if you could just talk a little bit about, I'm just trying to figure out if there's additional cost to this, or if it's something that is already being spent.
Representative Liebling.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Pep and Mr. Chair. There isn't any additional cost. And I think the part you're looking at on page 10, actually, that new language about the Commissioner of Administration has been taken out in other committees. We're not changing how it's administered. It's going to be left where it is right now. So that part kind of doesn't apply right here. And the setting the program budget and all of that is what they currently do. We're just changing the makeup of the group that makes the decision. We're not changing the fact that the boards do that. Mm-hmm. So we're just restructuring the group that does the hands-on decision-making.
Representative Pepe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Lee, I just have a process question then. So this is not the bill that you're moving forward. You're moving forward a different omnibus bill. I'm concerned about having language. You said that language doesn't really exist anymore, so I'm wondering if we should remove it here, or what the intention is with the process. I think it was starting on 10.7.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Shepard, I've heard her say, the Representative Liebling say this twice about this isn't the exact language that's been taken out of the committees. What is the rule on the substance and hearing the substance of the bill? Is what we're doing here. Mr. Shepard.
Mr. Chair and members, the House rules require that bills creating advisory committees be reviewed by the Governmental Operations Committee, and it provides that they either have to, that the bill has to be referred there, or that the committee approve the substance of the matter. And so I think the things that are within the mandatory jurisdiction of the committee are the advisory groups that you've been talking about so far. And so some of these other matters, if Representative Liebling has changed them in a different bill already, probably are not things the committee would have to approve under the House rule, in my view.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Shepherd, that part in particular that starts on 10.7, are you saying that that part does not have to be fixed up here? Because it's talking about the Commissioner of Administration. I just want to clarify if we need to fix it here. It doesn't matter.
Representative Pepin, I was having the same question in my mind, so, Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Chair and members, and of course, I'm not the one that I can give you my thoughts on what the rules mean, but they're your rules for you to interpret and for the House members to apply. But in my opinion, this part that you were referring to is not something that would have caused the bill to come here if that were the only thing.
All right. Mr. Chair?
Representative Liebling.
And, Mr. Chair, thanks. And this bill did go to state government finance, and that was where that section was removed. So it actually probably shouldn't have been included in this delete all at all. Representative Pepin, if you want to remove that section, I just, because that language has been removed and is not going to be in the omnibus bill. So, that my understanding was,
So, Representative Liebling, you're
Yes,
talking
Mr.
what section? Are you talking the whole section?
No,
3?
no, Mr. Chair.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
just the.
Sorry. I'm using that word a little too loosely here.
So 10.7 to 10.13, the new section C, you're saying that can be removed?
Yes, that has been removed from the bill by the GovOps Finance.
Mr. Shepherd, I see you.
Mr. Chair and members, then the appropriate motion, which I'll write up for Mr. Gabhart, would be on lines 10.7 to 10.13 to reinstate the stricken language and delete the new language.
I'll move that amendment. Members, all in favor of the amendment as stated by Mr. Shepherd, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The motion's approved. Representative Liebling. Excuse me, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Liebling, I just have one, this is probably because I'm not on the committee. If you could just, what's a regulated person? It's listed throughout here, and I'm not really clear what that is. Could you just, since it talks about it throughout the bill, I just was wondering if you could define that.
Representative Pepin, or excuse me, Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Pepin. I believe that refers to somebody who's regulated under one of the health-related licensing boards. So not everybody who's under that board has a license. Some have they're regulated at a different level. They're registered or they have a certificate or something. So it's a kind of a broad term. I believe that there might be somebody else here who could give you the more expert answer on that, but that's a term that's used throughout the health-related licensing board's statutes.
Representative Pepin. Representative Truskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Liebling, I'm looking at that section that language I was looking at before, and here's my thought. I wanted to get your sense of it before I would move the amendment. 9.23 and 4, if we would strike means agreeable to and replace it with majority vote of. And, Representative, that wouldn't preclude them from continuing their current process, whatever that is, but it would provide a backstop in the event that there's some sort of level of dissension that appears in the future that would be a little more solid. And then you would do the same on line 9.25, and you would strike means agreeable to and replace it with majority vote of. Is that something, Representative Liebling, you would support?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Liebling.
Mr. Chair, Representative Drazkowski, I think that sounds great, and, without getting the advice here of those people, but I think that makes the bill better, so I'm happy to take that amendment.
So, Mr. Shepherd, you have that? Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Chair, members, yes, I do have that and I'll write it down as stated by Representative Drazkowski.
So as I understand this, members and Representative Truskowski, on line 9.23, delete means agreeable and insert majority vote of, and then on 9.25, delete means agreeable and insert majority vote of. Is that your amendment, Representative Truskowski?
Mr. Chair, we missed one thing. On line 9.24, you need to strike the word to, the first word on 9.24. Otherwise, you got it.
And do we, and two, and also the one, On 9.26 also, or on 9.25 also? Okay. So everybody understand the amendment then, as it was stated? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, the motion's approved. Any other questions in this section? Representative Khan?
This is on another section, or do we?
We have,
Should I wait?
Which section?
Section 8.
We're moving,
Oh.
we're trying to move
Okay.
down in an orderly fashion.
Sorry.
So any more discussion on section 3? The next section we got here is section 6. Representative Liebling,
Thank
explain
you,
what that does.
Mr. Chair, this is from a Huntley bill that has to do with the Healthcare Homes Advisory Committee, and
And members, that's in the original bill, I believe. Where's the section?
well, Mr. Chair, I'm looking at the amendment, and I'm on page 13.
13 of the amendment?
Section
Okay.
6.
Okay, I see it here. My eyes didn't catch it. Go ahead, Representative Liebling.
So, Mr. Chair, and this isn't, this is being carried in the omnibus bill. It's not my language. There might be somebody here in the room who could speak to it more if the committee has questions on it.
My understanding is that's a Huntley bill that we're going to be hearing later today, House File 2760, that language. If we want, we can wait till then and have Representative Huntley describe that. That's going to end up in your omnibus bill?
That's correct, Mr. Chair, and of course, our intention is whatever the committees of jurisdiction change, we'll make the change back to the omnibus bill.
So members, if we can discuss it now, or we can wait till Representative Huntley's here later and do it then, and that would make more sense than having to talk about it twice. But I'll leave it to Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm fine with talking about it with Representative Huntley later. I just want to share with you my opinion on this, since you're going to be carrying the bill. I don't like the fact that it doesn't expire, and I'll ask Representative Huntley on why he thinks that's important. But just so you know, I would probably be offering an amendment on the floor to take that part out so that it would expire, or at least be reviewed.
Mr. Chair?
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Pepin. And again, I'm sorry this is such a confusing process. It is for me, too, but maybe Mr. Shepard could comment on this, but I believe that language is actually being changed. There's been some discussion about these do not expire, and I believe that's being changed to expire in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. But again, you'll be hearing it this afternoon. And
So Representative Liebling, why don't just to make it simpler for this bill, why don't we delete Section 6 from the amendment, because we're going to be hearing that later, and we can have the full discussion then. So I'll move that on page 1313 of the delete all amendment, that we delete Section 6, beginning on page 13.
Mr. Chair, you probably want to delete Section 7 as well. That's where the expiration is.
That's in this? That's already done.
We already deleted Section 7, so
Oh,
in the technical amendment.
okay.
So
There we go.
all in favor of deleting Section 6 of the 918 amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. The motion is approved, yes. Then Section 8, Representative Liebling, if you want to describe that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is something that is my bill. And if I could just give a really brief explanation to the committee of what I'm doing here. We've had some issues over the years with the TANF fund is the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. It's a block grant that comes from the federal government to do what we commonly call welfare. And over the years, that block grant has been used for lots and lots of different kinds of expenditures. Most of it does not, in fact, go to families who are on our Minnesota Family Investment Program. It's used for a lot of related things. And the funding, the actual cash assistance that goes to these families has not been increased since 1986. and I like to say that twice because people can hardly believe it, but the cash assistance that goes to families on our program has not been increased since 1986. Now, whenever we talk about this, and members can, have all kinds of opinions about what we should do with the money and how we should use it and so on, but the reality is that the fund is very confused. There are a lot of issues here. It's very hard to untangle it, and because it deals with federal requirements and funding and all these different programs that are being funded out of it. And so the only way to really get a handle on it bipartisanly, to really just understand what the fund is doing, where the money is going, my decision was to, instead of just trying to make a change in something there, to set up a task force to take a good look at this over the interim and come back with some recommendations to us so that we can at least make some informed decisions, understanding the full impact on our federal requirements and so on of how to proceed with using the money in this fund, whether we make changes to it or not. So that's what this is attempting to do, is just have a kind of a good, robust discussion going forward and come back with some understanding of what we're doing here. And of particular interest to me is the issue that what you see down here in, under the things that they should consider, would be number 5, the ability of the funds to support effective parenting and optimal brain development in children under 5 years old. Because we're getting these are children who are very, very vulnerable. The youngest children, I think everybody in this legislature by now probably understands how important early childhood influences are on the developing brain. And we need to make sure that when we take these very vulnerable children who are on our MFIT program, that we use the funds in the best possible way to support the development of their young brains. So that's what we're doing here, members. And again, I'm not an expert on task forces. I'm happy to take the committee's advice if you can help me make this more functional or have suggestions for me.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Liebling, I don't necessarily have any suggestions on the task force. I'm just curious on lines 15.12 and 15.13 that the staffing and technical assistance shall be provided within available resources by the Department of Human Services. And I'm wondering, do we know what the cost is, and are they okay with absorbing that cost?
Representative Liebling.
Mr. Chair and Representative Pepin, I can't remember specific conversation with them about this, but believe me, everything that's going in our bill is being fully vetted for cost. And so if they came to us and said it has a cost, we would not be able to carry it in our bill. So I have to tell you that I believe that this is all fully being absorbed by the agencies, and of course it's DHS and MDH that are participating in it as well.
Is there somebody here from DHS or here to comment? Welcome to our committee. Please state your name for the tape and proceed with your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Jenny Ernst, Department of Human Services. And in looking at this bill, much of the information that we're required to collect and work on, we already collect within the department. So we would not have a fiscal impact for doing task force work.
Thank you. Representative Kahn.
Oh.
You had questions on Section 8.
Yes, on Section 8. I think it's easily answered with one question. Is this just in session law?
Representative Liebling, is this going to be in
Yes.
session law or going to be in statute?
Mark just nodded, yes.
Mr. Shepard?
Mr. Chair and members, this would only be in the session law. It would not be codified in the Minnesota statutes.
Okay, the suggestion I was going to make, and I guess I wish staff would look at this for any bill we have, is that anything that's codified, if we ever have a task force, something that's codified, when the section expires, besides the section expires, if it's in the statute, we need to delete it in the statute, because that was the number of the parts of the unbill, which were deleting things whose was that where the language was still in the statute, but the job had been done. So if we just automatically, and it's not necessary here because it's only in session law, so that automatically, if any time that there's language like this where something expires, we should also delete it from the statute if it's in the statute. But if it isn't, then it's irrelevant.
And Representative Khan, in the bills that we're taking up this afternoon, later on today or this afternoon, whenever we get to them, they're what's going to end up being the Loeffler bill. There's a lot of that, deleting a lot of stuff, a lot of boards, task force that are no longer functioning.
Yeah,
So,
but I'm just looking at
Yes.
the ones that we're creating, that if we can just kind of automatically do it at the end of whenever we see that language, also make sure that if it's in the statute, it's deleted. So,
any further, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Liebling, beginning on line 15.14, it talks about the duties of the task force, and the language says then further down on 15.18, I think, and make recommendation as to which, if any, programs currently receiving TANF funds should be funded by the general fund. So, I mean, inherently baked into this language is the notion that that we're going to they're going to be looking for additional opportunities to spend general fund money, but would they also have the duties of looking at ending programs? Or maybe that was overlooked, I don't know.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Liebling.
And Representative Drazkowski. Representative Drazkowski, the purpose of the task force was not to end any programs. The purpose of the task force was to say, is this block grant that we get from the federal government being used appropriately? And as you know, having been here a while, as I have, a lot of times the legislature engages in some sort of fancy financing and uses pots of money to cover things where that pot of money was really intended to cover something else. And I think that might be some of the dynamic that's gone on with this fund over the years. I'm sure bipartisanly. This has been a pot of money that people have justified, just like the Healthcare Access Fund. It had a purpose, but then there was this thing that was a little bit related to it and this other thing. So I view this as kind of not about getting rid of programs. That's something that, the legislature can always look at and do. But something that's just kind of I view it as an unsession piece to help us kind of unscramble where things should be funded. So, for instance, if something's now funded in the TANF fund, and it really doesn't belong there, then I guess the legislature, future legislature, will have to decide, is this thing worth funding out of the general fund? And that will be a different conversation, but that wasn't the point of the
So,
test.
Representative Liebling, you're looking for greater transparency in how the money's being used.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's absolutely right.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Liebling.
Any further questions of the Representative Pepin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't necessarily have any more questions on the sections that relate to us, but I do have some brief comments on data privacy because Representative Liebling might want to hear them before it gets to the floor. Or if that would, if you permit
Representative
that.
Pepin, I'll give you a little leeway.
Thank you. It's just an overall concern I have with data privacy, Representative Liebling, and I'm glad that when you came, I was a little suspicious of the bill, but when you came and you said you have a lot of concerns about privacy, that made me feel a lot better. And I just want to make sure I understand what this bill is doing. One of the things that stuck out to me was the reporting. Let's see, it's line 5.14, 5.15. The board shall not retain data reported under subdivision 4 for a period longer than 5 years from the date the data was received. And it looks to me like it was a year, and so with this, the data will be retained for 4 years longer than in the past. And then, in addition to that, it looked to me like there'd be additional folks who would have it. In the line 6.12, it looked like authorized personnel of a vendor under contract with the state would also, that same paragraph would apply to them, so that would mean that they would have the information for 5 years. And then it looked like there's a new section on 6.27, personnel of the health professional services will also have, so it looked like we're expanding the people that have the the privacy data, and I'm just wondering if you could comment on that. I just have some concern with both extending the amount of time that the information is available, and then also adding the number of people that have that private information.
Representative Liebling.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Representative Pepin, thank you very much for the question, because I'm looking around to see if the program personnel or the Board of Pharmacy are in the room, because they need to hear that it's not only me who has these concerns. And so, same thing in civil law, same thing here. If you're giving me backing, because actually, I'm looking at this now, and this bill was put together before we went further, and in fact, today, they came in with a bill that was even much, much broader than what you're seeing here, and I wouldn't even introduce what they came with. And as we go through the process, they're hearing the same concerns from you that I've told them. And so today, I'm offering an amendment to my bill that's going to cut it down to 3 years. And what's happening is we want to make sure after a year, whatever data gets de-identified, and we're cutting out sending it to any outside parties at all. And so the de-identified data will be available under my version for 2 more years, but only for program operation and trend analysis by the PMP board. And then we're putting in language requiring the data to be destroyed, not just de-identified, but destroyed. Now, this is not something the board wants. This is something I'm going to insist on, and with your backing, thank you very much. So, believe me, I mean, I am all over this, but at the same time, we have to recognize that this program was put in place because of a really serious concern about opiate abuse. So I, and I think Representative Holberg and a lot of others, want to know that this is actually even impacting that, if it should, so to justify its existence, as I said before. And in order to do that, they have to have some access to even look at the program to see if it's even doing anything. So that's why I'm not cutting it off completely at the 12 months. But we're going to be very vigilant on this, because this is extremely sensitive information collected on innocent Minnesotans who just get a pain prescription because they need it. And it really, I'm totally with you on this.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Liebling, thank you for saying that. It makes me feel so much better to know that you're concerned. You have the same concerns that I do, and also I want to thank you for removing Section 1. I had some concerns with that. So that's it for me.
Any further questions of the author? Representative Pelowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Liebling, I'm still reading that 15.14 through 15.19, and I don't want to drag us out any longer, but it really does say that, well, if we read the language, the task force must report on past expenditures of the TANF block grant, including determination of whether or not programs for which TANF funds have been appropriated meet the purpose of the TANF program as defined under CFR Title 45, Section 260.20. So right there we're saying that we're going to evaluate whether or not they meet the federal purpose of TANF, and then it goes on to say that we're going to also then look at whether those programs would be better funded with general fund money. So if we're first evaluating the programs against the federal law to determine whether they meet the intent and purposes of federal law, and then one of the purposes of this language is to look at whether they would be better funded by the general fund, it would seem that decision-making process through which we are going through here to determine whether they properly meet the federal law may yield the notion in some cases that some of those programs are not meeting the federal law and are not on target for what they're supposed to be doing. In that case, it would seem to me that some of those programs may need to be eliminated.
Representative Liebling.
Mr. Chair, Representative Drazkowski, I think the chair said it very well. This is a transparency provision, some of the things that are being funded out of the TANF fund are not, in fact, federally mandated programs. They're state programs for which some of that money is being used. And as you know, money is fungible. So, you know, if the question is whether the line items should be under TANF fund or somewhere else, and it doesn't preclude a discussion about whether those programs are useful programs. This is only about what pot of money should be used. So it says here on line 15.17, make recommendations as to which, if any, programs receiving TANF funds should be funded by the general fund. It's just a recommendation about where the funding should come from, but this isn't telling the legislature it has to or should fund any particular program. It's just to try to untangle this very complicated funding scheme that we've had so that people can make decisions cleanly understanding what the implications are. That's all.
Thank you.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Liebling, I am trying to recall and would like to have you confirm which two, it wasn't sections, it was provisions in the bill were deleted in civil law. I just want to ensure that I have a comfort level with that. One of them that I've identified, I believe, is 7.21 through 7.24. I recall the conversation that Representative Holberg had about her concern with data crossing state lines.
Representative Liebling.
Right. Mr. Chair and Representative Pugh, yes, that is deleted. In fact, that's part of my author's amendment, I believe, today, or I have an amendment to bring that change back into the omnibus bill. So yeah, absolutely.
So
That's
Representative Pugh moves that House on the 918 amendment, they would delete lines 7.21 to 7.24.
Yes,
Does that
thank
give
you,
more
Mr.
comfort?
Chair.
All members understand that? If so, all in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The amendment's approved. Representative Pugh.
Yes, and if I could ask Representative Liebling, if you could please clarify the other section, the other component that was deleted in civil law, and I haven't yet found that. I believe it was on page 8.
8.7, I believe.
Thank you. 8.7 through 8.9.
Yeah,
Yes.
Mr. Chair and Representative Pugh, that was deleted as well. So, or it's in the same amendment that I'm carrying to delete that. So
Representative
delete it
Pugh
here.
moves that lines 8.7 to 8.9 be deleted from the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Members, all in favor of that amendment, please say aye. 8.7 to 8.9.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. The amendment's approved. If it's already gone elsewhere, we don't need to have it in ours and create confusion for the reviser. Any further questions on the bill? Falk, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I just had a question for Representative Liebling about, you said that the federal dollars, they get kind of mirrored up in some state programs. Is there any idea of the percentage that might, I'm curious, I don't know if the legislative auditors looked at this recently at all, but do you know perhaps what percentage of the federal dollars we're receiving that aren't necessarily going for the federally intended purpose?
Representative Liebling.
Mr. Chair and Representative Falk, the term federally intended purpose is, I can't answer that. That's kind of why we need the task force, because it's pretty confusing, but I think I recall that the figure is like 28% of the fund actually goes to families on MFIP as cash assistance, only like 28%. The rest goes to various programs, many of which may actually help impact those families in addition to other low-income families. But what the federal purpose is and what the law says, I'm just not that. It's complicated stuff, and that's exactly why we need the task force.
Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions from members? Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak for or against this bill? Seeing no one rushing to the microphone, I'll renew my motion that House File 2932 as amended, be re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Policy. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. The bill's re-referred.
Thank you very much, members.
The next bill we have on our calendar today is Representative Falk isn't here? Oh, you're there. You got to go upstairs? Representative Pelowski. Welcome to our committee, and
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
let me get 2128.
Mr. Chair, I believe...
2701, yeah, I'm sorry.
House File 2701, I believe the motion would be to re-refer to Ways and Means. Public Safety Finance? All right.
I'll move the House File 2701 be re-referred to the Committee on Public Safety, Finance, and Policy. Welcome to the committee, Representative Pelowski.
Chair, members, thank you. This House File has been in creation since prior to the special session of 2013. You have a list of individuals who are here today. Some of them have come quite a distance to testify in favor of the bill. All of them, in one way or another, have worked on the bill. There have been 6 meetings prior to session and round-robining this bill with the 13 agencies that deal with disasters, the governor's office, and the Senate. So Senator Cohn and I hosted these meetings with House and Senate staff, the legislative auditor, Minnesota Rural Electric Association, the Director of Homeland Security, the Association of Minnesota Emergency Managers, the Ramsey County Emergency Managers, the Minnesota Township Association, and Carver County Commissioners. Some of these individuals you see listed here today. We have a Carver County Commissioner, Randy Malinchik. We have Judge Judd Freed from AMEM. And we have other individuals who are here to testify. This bill was created to basically do 2 things. I don't think I need to remind you of the initial creation of Chapter 12A after the 2007 massive floods in southeastern Minnesota. That special session taught the state a lesson. We had no plan for handling any type of a natural disaster in this state. Chapter 12A was then created so that we would have a plan at the very highest level of presidential declaration. We had no idea that from 2007 until now, we would have 9 disasters, and some would say even more that did not rank at the presidential level. So this bill handles 2 issues. The first is, can we avoid a special session at the cost of the taxpayers, and also bringing all these legislators together, if we have a mechanism to transfer funds from either unspent funds from previous disasters, or, and what's created in this is the creation of a special fund that could begin implementation immediately of a federal match that would have all of these agencies, local units of government working prior to session. And then the advantage, of course, would be this, that when we would appropriate money, if more money would need to be appropriated, we would actually have working numbers. We would not be working with estimates. We would probably be working with fairly accurate numbers on what the disaster would cost. This bill does not prevent the calling of a special session. It simply gives us an option. So, if you take a look at the bill does a couple of things. In Section 1 of the bill, and I'm actually going to Article 1, Section 4. There is the creation of a contingency account. This account would allow transfer of money from unspent disasters or money that's been unspent in previous disasters, that would be allowed to flow into the account. There is another mechanism, and this was done because we did have a couple of fiscal forecasts that allowed us to say that there would be new money available. So although there is not an appropriation in this bill, you saw in the supplemental targets, $6 million in the House. The governor's office, although it was not listed as $6 million in his supplemental, the governor's office has also agreed that approximately $6 million is the average that it would take to ensure that we would be able to handle a disaster prior to a regular session, and that would be the amount that Ways and Means would appropriate for the bill. As you walk through the bill, the second big addition happens in Article 2. We have parts of the state that, because of the way FEMA regulates its allocation of funds. We have counties in the state that would not be available for funding. Article 2 is a new section, this would be 12B, that would allow funding to occur for those areas that under 12A they would not receive funds. So this bill basically does two things. It creates a fund in two different ways of allowing an immediate match of federal dollars. It ensures that we would not have to have a special session for some of the smaller disasters that have hit Minnesota. And it also answers the question of what happens when disasters hit and there are entities of the state that aren't covered by federal funds. Mr. Chair, there are some people who have come a distance. Brian Cranberry is here. He is the CEO of Tri-County Electric. We have other individuals, county commissioners. They may wish to testify briefly in support of the bill. And these individuals were also in support of the creation of Chapter 12A in 2008. They have worked with us on the creation now of the expansion of 12A to 12B and the creation of a fund. And almost all of these individuals have, in one way or another, unfortunately experienced a disaster and then have worked through Chapter 12A and the funding of the special sessions that we have called to ensure that that money has been spent well. So, Mr. Chair, I think Brian Cranberry is here, and then there may be a few others that you might want to call up in support of the bill.
I have a list of people here, and Bill Cranberry or Brian Cranberry is the first person on my list. Welcome to our committee, and please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Brian Cranberry. I am the President and CEO of Tri-County Electric Cooperative, headquartered in Rushford, Minnesota. We're a co-op with about 1,300 members, and we also serve 9 wholesale communities in southeastern Minnesota. We have 49 employees, and we have a 7-member elected board of directors. I especially want to thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning on this very important piece of legislation. I've been asked to address you because our electric co-op experienced one of the greatest losses in the electric co-op industry in Minnesota. On August 17th and 18th of 2007, 17 inches of rain fell in southeastern Minnesota. I recall that morning at 5:30 a.m., I received a call from the local fire chief, who is also my cooperative's line superintendent, to inform me that the water had risen in the local creek through Rushford and that our office and warehouse were underwater. The flooding was bad. From Tri-County standpoint, we lost our office, we lost our warehouse, we lost a fleet of vehicles of 26, including all of our digger derrick trucks that we used to restore service to our members. We also lost all of our inventory. These damages were over $6 million. Pretty much we did lose everything, in addition to over $1 million in our electric distribution system from washouts and landslides. Tri-County Electric is a nonprofit electric utility. We are eligible for FEMA assistance, but only if a state disaster declaration is declared. And even then, we're limited to FEMA-approved expenses. It was at this time that we realized that much of our damages were not eligible for FEMA assistance and also not covered by insurance because of the nature of the disaster, which was a flood, and we did not have flood insurance because we were not in a floodplain. We were also informed that co-ops were a gray area and that it was uncertain if we were even eligible for state of Minnesota disaster aid. Thankfully, local Representative Gene Pelowski recognized the need to propose changes in the 2008 disaster aid bill during the special session. Through the support of Representative Pelowski, the state legislature, and the governor, we received a $2.3 million loan to replace our fleet of trucks through the state of Minnesota. This 75% forgivable loan structured through deed was critical to our electric co-op because without this assistance, these funds would have had to come in the form of dramatic rate increases from a membership that was already reeling from the recovery of the loss of their homes and businesses, magnifying the impact. I would also like to note that the $2.3 million loan was repaid in full ahead of schedule. The proposed legislation before you today, House File 2701, clarifies eligibility for state of Minnesota disaster aid to nonprofit electric co-ops, much like it has for municipal public power systems. Electric co-ops, like municipal utilities, are owned by the people they served. However, unlike municipal utilities, we are not eligible for the automatic 25% state FEMA reimbursement during these disasters, even though our damage numbers are actually used in calculating FEMA damages by the county to qualify if disaster declaration that triggers federal aid. Representative Pelowski bill addresses the needed assistance and is also vital to our communities and electric co-ops recovery efforts. I ask for your support in this legislation, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share my comments today.
Thank you, sir. If you want to stick around, we'll get the testifiers out of the way, and then we'll ask questions all at one time. Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, Judd Freed is here, the Association of Minnesota Emergency Managers, and he apparently has other things to do today that may relate to emergency situations. So if we could call Mr. Freed up at this point, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, we can do that. Mr. Freed, welcome to the committee, and again, state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Judson Freed. I'm Director of Emergency Management and Homeland Security for Ramsey County, and I appear today as the Government Affairs Chair for the Association of Minnesota Emergency Managers, or AMEM. As you may or may not know, AMEM represents more than 400 emergency management professionals from all 87 counties, all of the cities of the first class, and most of the other communities across our state. And we have been working on legislation like this with incredible allies such as Representative Pelowski for more than 8 years, and I cannot tell you how happy I am to speak in support of this House file and to almost beg that you'll move this forward as quickly as you can. Since 1995, there's been at least one federal disaster in Minnesota every year since 2003. That doesn't count all of the other disasters that have happened that don't reach that federal threshold. Now, we don't keep statistics on every disaster that isn't legally called a disaster, but I can tell you that in Ramsey County, there's more than 2, on average, such emergencies that occur, for which there is no federal funding available, there is no state funding available. Last year, for instance, we absorbed almost $1.2 million in unanticipated, uninsured loss from flooding that was not eligible for anything, even though other counties around us did receive federal disaster aid. The way that this is all figured, as you know, is through a federally mandated cost share method. It's based on a per capita amount. The state has to absorb a certain amount of damage across the entire state of roughly $9 million, a little under $9 million across the entire state, and an affected county has to hit about $3.50 per capita. So in a county like Ramsey's, it's about $1.8 million. That's uninsured loss of public sector, not including any of the private sector issues that are out there. Most of us, in fact, I would say 87 out of 87 counties, don't have a spare $2 million just sitting around in case of. So when we spend that $2 million, we're spending it on we're not spending it on things like snow removal, fixing roads, maintaining other public safety issues. This legislation is important to us, and the processes that are already in place were captured by Representative Pelowski and the others while we were crafting this. There's no new learning curve for local emergency managers or county emergency managers. There's no additional work that we would have to do because we gather these numbers anyway, knowing full well that we are unlikely to receive any federal disaster aid. The reality, sir, is that I can lose an entire city like Shoreview, Minnesota. I can have it eliminated from the face of the earth by a tornado and not qualify for federal disaster aid. The people of that community, however, have a right to expect from their government that we'll do what we can to keep them resilient and to keep them able to rebuild, and that's what this legislation will help us do. It will help streamline the time frame by which we have to go through our federal requirements. It'll use those same exact methodologies now without any additional work on the local government part to perhaps get aid that we wouldn't otherwise be able to get and to cope with disasters that we wouldn't otherwise be able to cope with. So for those and many other reasons, but in the issue of trying to be at least a little bit brief, which is rare for me, I'll just simply conclude by saying once again that AMEM is truly grateful for this House file to be moved forward, and we ask for your support in moving it forward from here. And I'll be available for any other questions you have on emergency management or our community emergency managers.
So, Mr. Freed, do you have to rush away, or can you wait do you hang around a little bit?
It's been 8 years, sir. I will stay around.
Then I'm going to proceed and go and get the rest of the testifiers out of the way and then ask questions all at once.
Thank you.
Representative, or I have Mr. Joel Johnson. It's next on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'll be really brief. I just want to echo
Please
what...
state your name for the tape.
Joel Johnson. I represent the Minnesota Rural Electric Association, which represents all of the electric co-ops in the state. I just want to reemphasize how important this legislation is to us. Since 2007, up until last year's storms, electric co-ops had access to funds through deeds, Minnesota Investment Fund, to help rebuild after storms. And last year's special session, because it was all of the money was funneled through the Department of Public Safety, we didn't have access to funds. And this bill reestablishes our access to state relief during FEMA-declared disasters. And it is very important for our membership, particularly when electric co-ops, our capital investment in providing electricity to rural parts of the state, we don't have as many customer or members to spread that cost out. So this is very, very important to our membership. And I urge you to pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Randy Mulishnik. I probably massacred that. Again, state your name for the tape and proceed with your testimony.
Maluchnik is Polish for Peterson, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chairman Nelson and members, for allowing me to testify. I'm Randy Maluchnik, Carver County Commissioner. Association of Minnesota Counties has adopted this issue in their platform and are very concerned about it. And we're particularly proud to adopt it with the recommendation of the Association of Minnesota Emergency Managers. Has been testified before this morning, in certain circumstances, counties can be catastrophically impacted by a range of events without qualifying for federal aid. Many times, the fiscal and physical aftermath of emergencies can be placed on local government units and the county. These impacts can be so great that the local jurisdiction and the county cannot cope with the costs on their own. The long-term implications of a delay in funding can be troublesome, or can be as troublesome as unable to deal with a imminent public safety situation. It causes increased costs to transportation and other infrastructural replacement, and long-term negative effects on the county and the region's economic vitality. As a locally elected official, I can say that the availability of this ready funding will be a valuable tool to local jurisdictions. This initiative will, if passed into law, will save the taxpayers money. The cost of a catastrophic event can be better managed, and to minimize the need for future special sessions of the legislature to provide the state with matching funds when a presidential declaration is issued regarding a particular event. During my career as a congressional staffer, I watched local governments struggle with immediate funding needs during major flooding of the Red River Valley, the Minnesota River Valley, and of course the southwestern Minnesota tornado of 1997. To be sure, local governments are resourceful as they usually are, but I can't help but wonder, under the current situation, what the long-term costs are to the local area, the region, and the state of Minnesota. Thank you. That's my testimony, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Next is George Espenson. Welcome to the committee, and again, state your name for the tape and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. George Espenson. I'm the Eden Prairie Fire Chief, but I'm also the legislative chair for the State Fire Chiefs Association. And to keep it brief, everyone's kind of given you the rundown. What I'd like to say is that the State Chiefs Association is fully in support of this legislation. We think it's long overdue, and we definitely think this will be a big help to the state of Minnesota.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I want to recognize the work of the Director of Homeland Security. She's sitting behind me. She round-robined this bill at least 6 times to the governor's office and to the agencies and to other entities. And Senator Cohen and I could not have had what is before you now without her work. This went through 6 drafts at least prior to introduction. So the bill and the testimony that you see here has been built by these individuals. My name might be on it, but it reflects the work of all the individuals that have testified today.
And Representative Pelowski, in your introduction you were talking about, and I think that you said 12B for counties and large counties that have big tax base like Hennepin County, Ramsey County. I'm thinking of the tornado that went through North Minneapolis that missed my grandmother's house by a block. I think we had the tornado in Rogers that did not qualify for any additional funding from the state. Would they be brought in to be able to get some help?
Mr. Chair, 12B is the new entity that we have that answers your question. There are, and we can have the Director of Homeland Security come up, more and more states are adopting this type of an approach because of the increase in disasters and, in fact, the impact on counties and other entities that don't qualify for classic FEMA aid. The Director is here, and she may be able to answer that question in some detail.
Welcome to the committee, and please state your name for the tape.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Chris Eide, and I'm the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And as Representative Pelowski said, yes, the development of Chapter 12B will take care of those communities that have experienced a disaster that do not meet the threshold of federal assistance. It can still be devastating to a community, as was the Hugo tornado or the tornado in Rogers, which did not meet the $7.2 million threshold that we have to meet statewide to be able to do this. When we determined some of the eligibility requirements for the state program that will be initiated from 12B, we use the scenario of a Hennepin County and a Ramsey County, and how, as Mr. Freed said, you could completely destroy one of the communities within one of those entities and still not meet your FEMA threshold. So that's what this bill was based on. So it will take care of those communities.
Representative Pepin, you had questions before. We're at questions. Do you have questions?
Mr. Chair, just kind of general questions. Yeah, I didn't know I was even on the
Representative
list.
Pepin, I'm sorry.
Sure, I'm always happy to ask
Well,
questions.
I know you put your hand up before, and that's why I had you in the list.
Yeah, I do have
Representative
questions.
Pepin.
Well, I have one general question. Representative Pelowski, I know that Representative Erdahl has spent a great deal of time working on this as well, and I'm wondering how this is different than that.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pepin, Representative Erdahl is the co-author of the bill. And Representative Erdahl and I have met. He agrees with the bill, and he supports it. There he is.
And Representative Pepin, we originally were going to hear this bill. There's Representative Hansen has a bill similar, does things slightly differently, and Representative Erdahl had the same bill, and he said most whose cell phone is now going off, but he had a similar bill we were going to hear also today, and he said most of his stuff has been put into the contents of this bill, so his bill did not have to be heard. That's why we're not hearing his bill today. So that answers your question.
Okay. Mr. Chair, Representative Greenhagen is also a co-author, and so is Representative Davids. And each of them have had similar experiences, unfortunately, with disasters in their district.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I represent Rogers, so I remember how devastating that was. I think something like 500 homes were leveled. So I think this is, the general concept I like. I might have some concerns over some technical stuff, but generally I think, we're in the right direction. I do have a specific question, and it applies to a couple different sections in here, and it's reporting. And there's one that starts in line 2.28, one that starts, I think, in 3.1, and then another one on 4.31, and it just talks about the Commissioner of Management and Budget shall submit a report to the chairs of the House of Representatives Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committee. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to consider also having the minority leads of those committees have the information as well, just in case they had any questions. We generally do that with these things.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any problem with that. This whole section was worked on very tightly with Senator Cohen also, because we wanted legislative oversight of how this money was going to both be shifted and spent. So I don't have a problem with adding that at this point, but I don't have an amendment to do it.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you entertain adding an amendment at this time, or if not, I could wait till the floor?
Representative Pepin, we should do our work in committee, and I think if Mr. Shepard can work that out, we can do that before we leave. Representative.
Chair, I'd have a suggestion, since this is going to public finance,
Public safety finance.
Public safety finance. If we drafted the amendment, it could be offered there in public safety finance too, since it is a finance issue and an oversight issue. So rather than having it done on the fly, we could have one done, and then we'd make sure that it worked.
Representative Pepin, is that?
Thank you. It doesn't matter to me one way or the other, although Mr. Shepherd is excellent at putting amendments together on the fly.
Mr. Chair, and I know he is, I chaired this committee for 4 years too. This bill was not put together on the fly, though, and if we would wait and see if it actually worked to your, whatever you wish to do, I would hope that once the amendment's offered, it worked and we wouldn't have to redo it.
We'll let Mr. Shepherd work on it something, and then we can come back to that, and we'll see whether we want to wait till the next committee. Representative Pepin.
Thank you. On line 3.12, we're talking about fully paying all eligible claims under Chapter 12B. Is there do you have I can look in the book, but that wouldn't provide all the information to all of us. Could somebody kind of read off what those things would be?
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, I would, unless the director, no.
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair and members, the eligible expenses under this program would be debris management, it would be protective measures, it would be roads and bridges, it would be utilities and water, it would be park facilities, and it would be buildings, publicly owned buildings.
Representative Pepin.
That's what I was going to ask, public or private.
Representative Skowski. Wait a second. I got a list here first. Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my questions relate a little bit to Representative Pepin's. And I think maybe Ms. Heidi or Representative Pelowski can both address these. What I am a little bit concerned about is, first of all, I don't know exactly what it requires, what's required for a disaster declaration, although I think there is considerable discretion vested in the governor. And there's a lot of discretion in this bill to pay out claims based on disasters vested with the governor, and it's obviously through his commissioners, but essentially that is giving a lot of authority to decide who has a disaster and who gets money through the governor, and there's a report to the legislature, but there's no requirement that, for example, some part of the LCC or the LAC or some interim decision-making body, the legislature would have to approve it before the money is paid out. And so I guess the question to either one of you is, can you just kind of explain the amount of discretion that the governor would have in declaring a certain situation a disaster? And then, Representative Pelowski, whether you have any concerns that the legislature would not have a check on that.
Mr. Chair, we're only working within a very narrow range in this bill. We're working with approximately about a $6 million limit, and then the legislature would have to meet to appropriate money beyond that. We're working off of what happened in the last special session, that we had a rather small amount of money. We called the entire legislature together, and we had to appropriate that to get things started. The advantage of this bill is they could start, and we would begin to have an assessment of what this disaster was at $6 million or less. And then when the legislature met, if there were appropriations beyond that, they would be done. We had hoped that if you look on page 2 and the oversight that goes into page 3, that we would be monitoring very tightly even that amount of money and any amount of money that would be shifted from previous disasters. Both Senator Cohn and I had concerns about what would happen with unspent money. And we know that particularly local units of government can't just spend it right away. Some of these are rather large construction projects. They take years. So while the money's there, you still have the project that needs to be done. So we anticipated questions like yours, and certainly our concerns. Cohn chairs finance. He has real concerns about any money that's spent outside of when we're in session. So we're hoping that we're working within a very narrow range, that this would start a process. If we need to go beyond it, there would be a legislative session that we could appropriate then detailed amounts that would fit beyond the $6 million or less, or the 4.5 of the last special session.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not, and Representative Pelowski, I'm not in the least concerned about this governor or the last governor using a disaster fund like this for political purposes, but there's a governor in New Jersey who might consider doing something like that. And I just get concerned that there's reporting, but there's no check. And I do think we have some authority for at least a committee, joint committee of the legislature to meet and approve it. It's just wouldn't be certainly asking for an on-the-fly motion to that effect. And I do trust Senator Cohen and your judgment on this, but I just get a little concerned that we don't have a check, which would not delay anything if you had the capacity of the Speaker and the Majority Leader to convene an LAC group and make a decision.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I can only tell you that we tried to anticipate that, and you're looking at the section that has oversight, and if the committee wishes to add yet another group, I guess you could, and that would be another amendment on the fly, I would assume.
No, Mr. Chair and Representative Pelowski, this is really more for discussion's purpose. I think it would be fine in public safety, and I, of course, trust Mr. Shepard, but I don't want to cause you to have some sort of health situation at the testifying table as we tried to construct that kind of policy on the fly.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pelowski, as you know, I don't have health issues with this, but I do have concerns when we do things for the best of intentions and they simply don't work out.
Representative Kahn.
Well, Mr. Chairman, is there anything in this bill, and I was very pleased when I heard that Representative Pelowski was going to address this issue, and I think he was the perfect person to do it, because that special session just seems so totally unnecessary if we had had something like this in. But is there anything that would discourage people who should have insurance from not getting insurance? Is there anything in...
Representative Pelowski.
What?
Mr. Chair, Representative Kahn, no.
What?
No. Mr. Chair, Representative Kahn, no.
Okay, and then the final, another question, as long as I have the floor, although someone else has brought this up. On page 6, line 6.34, is that $1,000 limit on eligibility really a good idea? I mean, that could be like one roof or something like that. Or the answer is, should that number be significantly higher than 1,000? Well, how is that number set?
Ms. Ide.
Mr. Chair, Representative Kahn, we went over and over with that number, and the reason that we chose that number is because that's the FEMA threshold for the minimum eligibility of an applicant is $1,000. Since the writing of this bill, FEMA has now increased that to $3,000. So that would be something that, and that was like within the last few days, they changed that to $3,000. But would not be for things like roofs, because that should be insured, but it is uninsured losses.
Well,
Representative Kahn.
Mr. Chairman, that seems pretty easy to do. If this was based on the FEMA number, and the FEMA number has just been changed, it seems to me that we ought to change this. What would be the objection to doing that?
Representative Kahn, we can look at that going forward. Let's get more of the questions.
Okay.
That may come up. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for bringing this forward, Representative Pelowski, and all of your work on this. And you too, Director Ide, for all your work, and I've enjoyed working with you in the past in unfortunate circumstances in a couple of different times. What I see in 12B here, I see that we've really expanded our state's efforts, which certainly is debatable as to whether we should go to this extent. And I remember from the discussions, other states around us, I'd be interested to hear what the other states around us do. I do remember that the state of Iowa doesn't even provide some of the local match from the state government for the federally declared disasters. And so I'm curious, could you characterize, Director Ide, what the states around us do?
Ms. Ide?
Mr. Chair, Representative Drazkowski, it is across the board as to what different states do. Minnesota has been actually forward-leaning in recognizing the fact that that communities have more than just FEMA-eligible damages. And I think that's what this legislation was based on, was that there are a lot of damages in a community that they have to use their own community money in order to repair or to look like home again. This really is the basics of fixing what was there and destroyed by disaster. The state of Illinois does not pay any local match. I really don't know what the state of Iowa does, but it is really all across the board. I believe there are now 9 states that pay the full non-federal share, because they too recognize that there are many damages to a community that will not be eligible under this program or under the federal program. And then there are others like Illinois that do not pay any of a community's non-federal share.
Representative Pelowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Heidi. And I do see that we even on line 6.6 through 6.8 suggest that even if we don't apply for federal declaration, that the new 12B chapter would cover that. The part I do think is very important, regardless of what we do, is that 6.9 through 6.10, I think, is very good language, and that's one of the areas that we found that small towns that may have been completely wiped out didn't qualify for disaster aid because it didn't meet the formula that FEMA had. So I think that's very good. As I look at 6.3, we say, so if the state or an applicable local government declares a disaster or emergency, Director Heidi, can you tell us what that would mean? So if, if Laverne, Minnesota had, what type of events could that trigger for Laverne, Minnesota?
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Drozdowski, this program would be eligible for things in Laverne like a tornado that would come through and would maybe only be $1 million, but Laverne cannot handle $1 million loss. So in this instance, the county board, the mayor of Laverne would declare a state of emergency in Laverne. I believe Laverne is in Rock County, so Rock County Board of Commissioners would declare a state of emergency and then apply to the governor to declare a state emergency. So we would have to make sure that we go through the same steps as we go through with FEMA. So the state and locals would do a preliminary damage assessment. Then we would look to see what insurance they had, what was damaged, is it eligible damages? If it was insured, how much was it insured for? Make sure that it met 50% of the county FEMA threshold. So the county FEMA threshold in 2014 is $3.50 per capita. So first the damage would have to be the Rock County population times $3.50. So if Laverne was the only one that had a tornado, then Laverne would have to meet the whole half of the $3.50, $1.75 per capita. So that would make them eligible for a gubernatorial declaration of disaster. And then our staff would work with them on categorizing the damages, creating the project worksheets, and then reimbursing them. I believe this is 75% of the cost of repair.
Representative Pelowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Director Heidi. So the language, though, on 6.3 and 4, as I read it, suggests that if Laverne declared an emergency, they would qualify, and they wouldn't necessarily have to have state approval. Am I missing something?
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Drozdowski, 6.2 says satisfy all of the following criteria. The state or local government declares a disaster emergency. Damages suffered are the direct result of the disaster. Federal assistance is not available. The applicant incurs eligible damages. So that all is required to have a gubernatorial, may enter into grant agreements. It's in there somewhere.
It's here.
5.31, the director serving as governor may enter into grant agreements with applicants to provide financial assistance. The intention of this was when we apply for a federal declaration, our local and state, our governor has to declare a state of emergency. So that's what this is really intended. So then the president declares a major disaster. So the governor would be, in this instance, what the president does. So in order to be eligible, first we have to have your paperwork that your county board or your city council actually declared a state of emergency. And then the governor can declare a gubernatorial disaster declaration.
So Representative Ruskowski.
So, Mr. Chair and Ms. Eide, so if we took so what I'm hearing you say is that the intention is for this 12B to somewhat mimic that federal disaster process where the states apply to the feds. In this case, the locals would apply to the state. If we take the word "or" on 6.3, the state or, and we would say the state and applicable local government declare, or something to that effect. Is that what we're intending here, or is that what?
Ms. Eide.
Mr. Chair, Representative Ruskowski, that was the intention.
Because Representative Pelowski, I'm reading that the same way I think Representative Ruskowski is, which is a scary thought that we're thinking alike. But but if the or is there, the local government could declare it, and then it looks to me like we'd be on the hook for it.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any problem with changing it to and, so that's fine.
Representative Ruskowski moves that on line 6.3, we strike the or, the first or, and replace it with and. Mr. Shepard, does that accomplish what we're trying to do here?
Yes.
All in favor of that amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment's adopted. Representative Ruskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Eide and Representative Pelowski, is 12B public only assistance and not private? I think it is, but I want to make sure.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pelowski, yes, it is. It's a public assistance program.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ruskowski.
As I look at the 12B chapter, the newly created chapter, so it will be charged with $6 million, which I think a lot of members like the idea of the legislature not convening for disasters, especially the smaller ones that we maybe wouldn't need to. So that's a very attractive part of this bill. But as I look at that reality in combination with the low threshold of $1,000 or $3,000 or whatever we make that, I'm worried that we're going to have a situation that, Laverne has a mudslide, and the mudslide covers up the highway, and 2 or 3 hours of work, that threshold is overcome. Maybe less than that, depending. I don't know how much it costs to run a payloader, but and then we've got a lot of communities in Minnesota that would do that, and I just fear that we're going to have every local unit of government coming for these very small claims and coming forward, but maybe there's something else in the construct of the bill that would prevent that from happening. So Representative Pelowski looks like he's ready to comment.
Mr. Chair, Representative Ruskowski, I'm not sure I understand where you're going with this. This is to set up a process when a disaster is declared. You're not saying we're just going to spend $6 million. If the costs go beyond that, a special session could be called or more money can be appropriated during a regular session. This doesn't limit the amount of money that's being spent. It simply says you don't have to call a special session to begin a process of addressing a disaster, at which time you may need then in the regular session to appropriate more money. This just begins the process.
So Mr. Chair and
Representative Guskowski.
And Representative Pelowski, I guess what I'm saying is this threshold is $1,000, and if we have, I don't know, there might be something else interacting with this that limits this, but what I can envision here is we've got a storm that covers all of Minnesota, and 20 communities have mudslides that are not major, but they pay for this. This will pay for the cost of cleaning up each of those, and then there's some wind damage, and then there's some other things. It just seems to me that if this threshold is this low, what we're going to have is this $6 million is going to be chewed up through Laverne calling an emergency and the governor agreeing that it's an emergency for Laverne because they can't handle the costs there in that particular situation. And that $6 million be chewed up and then defeating the purpose or the idea of creating the account in the first place so that the legislature didn't have to meet. And suddenly the $6 million is gone, and then when there's maybe a federally declared disaster, that the $6 million could have helped defeat the need for the legislature to meet. The legislature is now in a position where they would have to meet. So that was.
Mr. Chair, Representative Guskowski, this $1,000 is the minimum, or if we were to even have language that would say consistent with the FEMA minimum project. This is one project. So Laverne, being in Rock County with, let's say, 30,000 people, they would actually have to have $45,000 to $50,000 worth of damage in the county, or if it was only a Laverne issue, $50,000 in the city of Laverne. So then we might have the Public Works would be have a project. The county itself would have a project. County Highway may have costs. If the county highway costs are $995, that would not be eligible. So they still have to have the $50,000 damage, but each individual project would have a minimum of $1,000. So if you have overtime of $900, we would not pay your overtime. If you had overtime of $1,005, then we would pay 75% of the $1,005 overtime.
So, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Heidi, so that $50,000 in your illustration comes from that federal calculation?
Correct.
Or that population?
Correct.
What if it happens in the township next to Laverne where there's the population's 200 people?
Ms. Heidi.
They would still have to have the $50,000 damage if it's just in the township. If the only damage is in the township, they have to meet 50% of the FEMA threshold for their entire county.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Heidi.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And kind of following up on Representative Drazkowski and Representative Kahn's question, I think the motion that was made to make a state and local declaration is a protection for the taxpayers, because then you have at least a check on the system. I think the concern here is that the bill turns into a disaster ATM, where anybody, I think there's great sympathy, and the legislature has shown that we would respond when there is a disaster. I don't think we want the legislature to respond when the wind blows and a window gets knocked out, and the cost of probably to replace one window in this building would be more than $1,000. So that threshold on 6.34, I think at a minimum should go to $3,000 and probably should go higher, because we're not having the ability. I think the $6 million will get used up, because if you have the declaration for a county and they meet the per capita, then every little project you're going to have over $1,000. And I have a question, I guess, specifically. So this, the 12B would operate when we are in session, or not when we're not, only when we're not in session?
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen, technically it could operate in both because it's state law, but the intent is when we are not in session and to, no one's saying we're stopping special sessions. That, any governor can call one at any time, and that's under their purview. This is hopefully to say we don't need to call one on the repetitive basis that we've had in the past. And also, a special session for us isn't on a disaster. It's on everything under the sun. And we throw in bills on every other issue you can possibly imagine. So if we could restrain ourselves and maybe just contain it to one thing, it would be well served. But we can't. And unfortunately, these communities, and over the last few years, have suffered as a result of our inability to begin to start this. Rushford's the best example. That special session should have been called well before it was, and it was not. That community suffered huge losses, and those losses exacerbated over the time we didn't meet and actually began to address the concerns of that community in all of southeastern Minnesota. So there is no intent here of having some sort of an ATM machine. But there is, hopefully, a process by which we can address where businesses, homes, communities have been damaged, and we can make sure as soon as possible we start the repairs. Particularly when you're looking at the weather we've had recently, we would hope that we would begin to have repairs before the winter set in and made some repairs impossible.
Representative Hansen.
Mr. Chair, and I agree, and I remember the Rushford one, and that was, I think that should have been declared faster. And I agree that I don't believe we should have had the one last fall. I think we should have had something like this, and that's why I put in the bill as well, that I think we shouldn't be having the session for those. My concern is on our inability to restrain ourselves as well, that if we have a $6 million cap and we have a demand that accrues over time, I'm not worried about the large disaster, what I would call a disaster. I'm worried about the cumulative small costs that aggregate up, where if we provide for that and we hit the $6 million cap, the $6 million cap will disappear within 2-3 years, and then it'll become a $10 million cap, and then it'll become a $25 million cap, because we are going to have more erratic weather. It's happening. So we've had requests for blizzards, we've had ice storms, we've had all those things where Minnesotans are getting hurt, and immediate response is needed. But how do we have a protection for the taxpayer? I think the amendment that had occurred goes part of the way, but I still, Commissioner Eide, based on your discussion, I think you're still going to have small expenses, because even with a disaster, a presidential declaration, it's usually by county. And so you could be clocking these small $1,000, and I think $3,000 is still a small expense, particularly when we're going to the 100% coverage. So I would move
Representative Hansen
on 6.34 to add 10 after 1,000 and make it 10,000.
Representative Hansen, so you're saying on line 6.34, you're moving that we put a 0 after the 1.
Correct.
Before the comma.
So it'd say projects and claims.
Or strike 1,000 and put 10,000. Would probably be an easier way to say it.
So it'd say projects and claims totaling less than 10,000 instead of 1,000.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'll leave it up to the committee. We know we have to move it to 3,000 because of the change in FEMA, so I'll leave that to the will of the committee.
Mr. Shepard, so the motion would be strike the 1,000 and insert 10,000?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Members, all in favor of the amendment to, on line 6.34, to strike the 1,000 and insert 10,000, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. The amendment's adopted.
Mr. Chair,
Representative Pelowski.
I share Representative Hansen's concerns and the concerns of other people at the table. I want to remind everybody here that prior to 2008, we had no plan at all, none. And when a disaster hit, in 2007, I was told in my office 20 minutes before I had to come down and present the bill, and this is by one of our most respected House researchers at the time. I asked where the bill came from. Her response was, she didn't know. It was cobbled together from every disaster that we'd had in the past 50 years in the hope that it would address what happened in southeastern Minnesota. In 2008, working with a Republican administration and a Democratic member of this House, we made sure that would never happen again, that there would be a plan. Now we have 12B, because technically we've got the same situation. We have disasters hitting for which we have no plan. And the capacity, as Representative Drazkowski and others have said, of some of these local governments, they simply can't handle it. They don't have the ability to address these disasters. So we've been incrementally working our way into a situation where we need to have a plan. The special sessions, I think that we've had, a number of them could have been avoided. That doesn't stop our oversight. It doesn't stop our ability to say when we come back that we can appropriate whatever the real numbers are. The one thing this does, it allows all of our agencies to begin to compile real numbers. There have been complaints about how these numbers don't match up. They'll say it's an estimate. Sure, it's an estimate. When you're looking at an area that's devastated, how do you know how much it's going to take to repair it? If we would wait and have the local units of government and the agencies begin to compile real numbers when we come back into session, I'm going to anticipate that we're not going to see these estimates be so far off. They're probably going to be very much within a certain range. And that's an advantage to us, too, and that helps us in appropriating the right amount of money. So this isn't perfect. Disasters aren't perfect. But at least we have a process in place.
And Representative Pelowski, so to the question that Representative Hansen's asked, and I've been, some other people have asked me this question. If we're in session, say we're in the normal, the first session of the biennium, when we're here from, and disaster happens while we're in session, this wouldn't automatically spend the money. It would get the process started. We would still be able to take care of this on our own while we're in session, or?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members, when we're in session, and everybody knows what that means.
Representative Hansen, you had a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had it on a different subject just because of the rural electric's testimony, and I want to be clear. Would the rural electric co-ops be able to tap into this fund that's for local governments, or are they in support of the local governments getting the fund?
Representative Krause.
I'm going to let the Director of Homeland Security,
Ms. Heidi,
answer this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Hansen. I can't say what the rural electric is supporting, but in Chapter 12B, nonprofits are not an eligible recipient.
Ms. Heidi, repeat that. They're not ineligible?
They are not eligible.
They are not eligible. Okay, I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
Correct.
Representative Hansen.
And, Mr. Chair, if the rural electrics were eligible, I think this would require a trip to the Energy Committee. I think that would be broadly expanding the issue here, that local governments are one thing, but the rural electrics are something completely different. And I would hope that what I'm hearing your testimony as is the rural electrics are not eligible under this bill. Is that correct?
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen, that is correct.
Representative Pepper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Pelowski, I just had a question or two that, a Kahn question earlier, Representative Kahn question that kind of sparked this for me. She had asked if there's anything that would prevent or that would discourage local government, I believe, from buying insurance. And so I'm just curious about that. I think you said there wasn't anything that really addressed that issue. And I don't know the answer to this. And are local governments required by law to have insurance? And if so, how much are they required to be insured up to? Because I know that there's a section 6.32 and 6.33 that says that the disaster-related costs that should, in the determination of the director, be covered and compensated by insurance would be ineligible. So I'm not sure if that means that if the director determines that the city should have insurance and they don't, or if it means that they believe that the insurance that the government, the local government has, should cover it.
Mr. Chairman, we'll let the
Representative
director
Pelowski.
answer it
Decide.
as director, right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pepin, what this means is that all local government should have insurance for everything that is insurable. If they do not, then what they should be insuring on that type of a facility would be deducted from any reimbursement that they would get. That is how it is right now with FEMA, and that is how it would be with the state program.
So, Ms. Idy, if they, as the one testifier talked about, a flood that was had and they're not in a floodplain, they wouldn't be assumed to have to have flood insurance, but say a town that is in a floodplain and didn't have flood insurance, that wouldn't be covered, where the one where the person is not in a floodplain would be covered? Is that kind of what you're saying here, just for that example?
Mr. Chair, that could be a very good example.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm hearing, and maybe the League of Cities can correct me, is that there's no actual requirement that by law that a city has to have insurance or local government has to have insurance. So I'm concerned then that this legislation might encourage them to not carry insurance, because if they would be eligible, regardless of whether they had insurance, I think that's problematic.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pepin, if they should have had insurance, they would not be eligible for reimbursement. If they chose not to insure and that facility was damaged, they would not be eligible for reimbursement to repair an uninsured building that should have had insurance.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Idy, where is that covered in this language, in this bill?
Well, disaster-related costs that should, in the determination, be covered and compensated by insurance. So 6.32 covers that, along with the public assistance program regulations manual, our administrative plan for this plan. It will be just like the FEMA public assistance. That has in the history of states having public assistance programs, they have chosen to adopt the FEMA regulations, and that is exactly what the state of Minnesota would do.
Representative Pelowski.
I think we have an answer. Let's bring back Mr. Freed. I think he has a specific answer to the question of insurance.
Mr. Freed, if you could pull another chair up there, that way Ms. Ide wouldn't have to get up. That we have extra chairs here. Welcome back, Mr. Freed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. What you're addressing, by the way, is spot on, and I'm really glad that you brought it up. And it really, I have to apologize to the committee, because in my effort to be as brief as I was, I don't think I explained very well some of the details here, and we're off track on some things, I'm afraid. As for the insurance issue, right now, counties and local governments don't insure everything. They accept risk. I teach risk management at the university. This is Risk Management 101. There is some risk that you transfer, there is some risk that you insure against, and there is some risk, of course, that you accept. If a community decides to accept the risk of not insuring anything they have, they run significant, pardon the pun, risk of having that thing be not replaceable. They'll have to be on the hook for it right now, today, without this law. And this law will not change any of that. Neither is this an ATM for disasters. What this is that if the entire county, not just the city of Laverne or a township next to it, but the entire county absorbs a significant amount of damage, $3.50 per capita, half of that, and there's the things that are damaged are public property that is eligible under a whole set of rules which are addressed here. Those are those categories A, B, C through G. They're uninsured, and they don't have to have been insured. All of those things are in place, and they hit that threshold, then the governor could decide to declare the disaster. So if in my county, I recommend to my board that we have a disaster in our county, what I'm asking my board to do is to tell their constituents that this situation is something that couldn't have been foreseen and that they cannot cope with. So I'm going to ask politicians to tell their constituents they cannot cope with this. That's a significant step. We don't declare disasters easily. Once we do that, we then have to go through the process of gathering all of this information together, submitting it through a set of forms, and the nice thing about this particular bill as proposed is that they're more or less the same forms we currently use, so we don't have to go through a ton of unfunded training. Bring that to the state office, in this case HSEM, Homeland Security Emergency Management, have them verify our amounts and verify that these are things that didn't have to have been insured to begin with, and then have them pass that on to the governor for the governor's declaration of an emergency. So all of that is in place and is covered here in the bill as proposed before you right now, and we're not changing that. So in the end, whether it's $3,000, $10,000, or $1,000 per project, if I had a $20,000 projects in Ramsey County, and they were really ugly, and I was able to convince my county board that we should declare an emergency for that $20,000 would not come anywhere near my threshold. I wouldn't be able to get the governor to declare a disaster, and this legislature would not pay me 75% of anything at all. That would still be on my county. We respond to these disasters whether or not we're going to get paid. We don't think about it, we don't go through it. But during that response, we start gathering this information, because if there is a way to make my citizens whole, be able to keep their government functioning, I'm going to do everything I can to keep that government functioning and provide them the services they need. So we're gathering the data. If it hits our threshold, we'll ask. If it doesn't hit our threshold, we can't ask. So, Mr. Chair, this would not encourage anyone to get extra insurance, nor would it discourage anyone from taking insurance. They would assume whatever risk they do assume and understand that, some things are not going to be reimbursed by the state, some things are not going to be reimbursed by the federal government. But when it gets so bad that we have to tell our constituents that we cannot do this on our own, we're asking for your help.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Free, I still think that those lines 6.32 and 6.33 are a little vague, and perhaps you can show me later where it's covered in current law that my concerns will be alleviated. The words that say be covered and compensated by insurance, what would happen if, say, the insurance that that the local government has purchased only covers flood disaster of over $50,000, and so the city tries to get the claim, but the insurance says no, we're not covering it because it's only $11,000 worth of damage. This to me says it's be covered and compensated by insurance. So if it's ineligible if it's determined that it should be compensated by insurance, but yet the insurance company might say they're ineligible. See what I'm saying? There's nothing that requires the insurance company to compensate. I'm just worried about lawsuits because we can't control whether or not necessarily the insurance company is going to pay a claim without legal action.
Mr. Freed.
Mr. Chair, Madam Representative, the short answer is you are correct. Insurance companies sometimes don't pay out. And that doesn't go to whether or not the request is eligible. So when we're asking for our eligibility, we have to have hit that threshold in uninsured loss. Now, later on, the insurance company may come back and deny our claims. That does not guarantee that the state, or if this was a presidentially declared disaster, it doesn't mean that the federal government would reimburse us for that either. We do incur risk. We do have significant levels of skin in the game. This is not to make us completely whole in every situation, and it's not to allow us to shirk our own responsibilities. Rather, it's there for those unbelievable but we recognize will happen events. In some of the communities out there, a $10,000 loss is going to be devastating. That could be their entire public works budget for the year. which means that they're going to put other projects on hold, citizens won't get the things they were expecting, their streets won't get plowed, et cetera. So what we're looking for here is, in the event that that tornado happens to touch down in my community and do a substantial amount of damage, that there's some possibility of recourse.
I believe you have somebody else that wants to answer the question. You want to come forward? Thanks, Mr. Freed. And members, remember, we have to be at session at noon. We'd like to get this out of here beforehand. I know I have another bill that we'd like to get out of here beforehand. So 10 minutes to 5 minutes to we have to recess to get to session. So welcome to the committee. Please state your name.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Craig Johnson with the League of Minnesota Cities. And as I think a lot of members are aware, part of the League's business is our League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust, a separate entity that does provide liability insurance for most of the cities in the state. There is not a requirement that a city have liability insurance, but the liabilities a city has, as you heard quickly rattled by Mr. Freed, are extensive, way beyond anything that just a storm would deal with. It's sidewalks and lights tipping, and I mean, it's every property that the city owns and all the infrastructure, whether intersections are properly maintained, everything. So cities do have their liability insurance, or they would very quickly have one lawsuit and the city would be gone as far as fiscally viable. But some are self-insured. Some have put together their own pool so that they don't have to get an insurance policy. They pool their own money for covering those purposes. Mr. Freed knows the case-by-case of how the claims go under a disaster much better than I do. I don't work directly with our insurance trust. But I can tell you that the liability coverage cities need is very extensive. I don't think anyone would change the coverage they're having on their entire city over whether there might be a chance they could get some small amount back under a disaster situation. There's just too many other potential claims.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the language should be tightened up a little bit, but we can talk about that later. I just have one additional question, and I'm just wondering if, and this relates to the part that we just amended, for projects and claims totaling less than $10,000 now, and I'm glad that that was changed, but I'm wondering, so would this bill give local governments the ability to provide financial assistance to private homeowners with or without insurance?
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pepin, this bill and this program would not deal with homeowners.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I was looking at, if it didn't deal with private homeowners, I'm just wondering why that wouldn't be clarified under ineligible costs, because it says it's going to the local governments, but I don't see anywhere it says where it prevents them from giving the funds, passing it on to their residents.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pepin, there are the 7 specific categories, and homes are not one of those categories. This is a public assistance program. So categories A through G, which is the debris management, protective measures, utilities, public buildings, parks. This is not an individual and households program.
Representative Pepin.
Mr. Chair, are those the ones that are listed in Chapter 12B? So it would have to be listed under...
That's correct.
Under that. So under no circumstances would a private homeowner be eligible for any of these funds through their local government?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have an amendment that Mr. Shepard has drafted that I think is a transparency amendment that would require Ms. Heidi's group to post on the website any paid claims. So that way the public could see what we're doing. We've done this in other agencies to show kind of the budgetary responsibility. So, Mr. Shepard, do you have the language for that?
Mr. Shepard.
Mr. Chair and members, the language for Representative Hansen's amendment would be on page 9 after line 13. There'd be a new subdivision 5 with a head note that would say reporting requirements, and the language, which I have written down, would say the director must post on the division website a list of the recipients and amounts of payments made under this chapter.
And Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm fine with it.
Mr. Shepherd, do you want to repeat that again so that everybody understands it?
Mr. Chair and members, on page 9, after line 13, there'd be a new subdivision 5 with a head note, reporting payments. The language would read, "The director must post on the division website a list of the recipients and amounts of payments made under this chapter."
Members understand the amendment. Any questions on the amendment? If not, all in favor of the Hanson amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment's adopted.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with the transparency and the other amendments and the dollar change, I would ask that the next bill be pulled from the agenda so that we can save a little bit of time. I would ask Representative Pelowski that, as this bill moves through the process, that I know there's always amendments and the Senate can be a different body, but I think keeping these taxpayer protections in there is an important step.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hanson, I think, particularly in reference to the Senate in this case, this is one of the few times we have worked very well with the Senate and continue to work very well. Senator Cohen has been in my office repeatedly meeting with individuals, and I've been in his, and we're in communication over this, so I would anticipate that there would be no issue with any of the amendments made in committee today.
Representative Pugh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's going to be just a comment, a suggestion to the author. Goes back to line 6.34 and the amendment that the Representative Hanson amendment that was made, increasing the amount from $1,000 to $10,000. And my thought as that amendment was being considered was that it might be a good idea to consider a staggered amount based on the size of the community affected. I don't really know if that logistically could be considered, but it would seem to me, based on the example that was given of, a mudslide in Laverne, and based on what might happen in a city, a much larger city, that could handle something more than that $10,000 amount. So I just have a suggestion and any feedback that might be.
Ms. Ide.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pugh, I could talk to our program administrators and our engineers and see if that would be trackable, workable. I can certainly do that.
Yeah. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. I was in audit commission, and I guess, does this apply to electric utilities at all? Would it apply to cooperatives?
No, that Representative Pelowski.
Representative Falk, we've already answered the question.
And I know Representative Falk wasn't here because he was chairing another committee, so if you can repeat the answer for him, it would be great.
No.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the other question I had, too, and perhaps this has been covered, so I apologize if it has, but if a city decides to go and create like an industrial park that is suited or situated perhaps in like a floodplain or someplace where it is not structurally sound, would we be on the hook to go and bear 100% of those costs because FEMA doesn't cover any of them? Or is there some other type of protection? Because I know sometimes local units of government do some interesting things, and I don't want to become the insurer of last resort for bad decisions.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, Representative Falk, I think Ms. I is going to have to answer it, but there would have to be a disaster in place. Because they build poorly doesn't necessarily mean that there's a disaster if it fails. It has to be a disaster under the criteria of either 12A or 12B. So I'm not sure how building poorly would necessarily fit into it. A disaster is a disaster. You would have an impact of certain damage. That damage could be calculated by the city. I'm not sure how your question applies. You have to have a disaster.
Representative Pelowski, would that kind of fall under, maybe Ms. Ide, the question I asked earlier about floodplain, not floodplain? If they built in a floodplain and didn't have flood insurance, I believe that, my understanding, they wouldn't be covered. Ms. Ide.
Mr. Chair, Representative Falk, that is correct. They would still have to follow the floodplain ordinances. They would have to follow the national floodplain rules and regulations, and if it was in a floodplain and substantially damaged, then they would have to move it out of the floodplain in order to get any damage. All the same rules that are in the FEMA public assistance program would be scaled to a state gubernatorial declaration.
Representative Fall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Heidi, for that. I guess the question I had more along the lines of, let's just say that, part of a city qualifies, for instance, for disaster declaration, meets the criteria. They also have damage that occurs outside of the declaratory area because perhaps it was cited poorly or whatever. What mechanism is there to prevent the costs of perhaps the poorly cited development from being just kind of pooled into the costs that we end up bearing? I just see that there's potential that when you have even like a large disaster, there's certain things that qualify, certain things that don't, and I want to make sure that we're not on the hook for the entirety of the cost of the things that wouldn't qualify. And I know it's perhaps a little bit hard to quantify, but I think that there's just some challenges there.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, Representative Falk, there was a legislative auditor's report on the legality of spending in disasters, particularly after the 2007 flood. And in that report, these and other issues were handled. And we're quite aware, particularly in the case of 2007, where there were improprieties and there were actions taken to make sure they would never happen again. So we're aware that cities may try to do that. We're also aware that we can catch it, and if they don't fit the criteria, it's not going to be done. I think that's the best answer I can give you. It's almost a case-by-case situation now. But you did have, Rushford was, in at least one case, applied it to a particular business that was not impacted by the flood, and they were caught, and there was they paid compensation for that.
Members, any further questions? Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is probably for Ms. Heidi. I'm still a little confused about eligible costs, and it says on 6.24 and 25, the FEMA's Public Assistance Program. Is that readily accessible? If I go Google it, can I find what exactly? I don't know exactly what's included in that.
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pepin, you absolutely can Google it. It's actually in 44 CFR Part 206, I believe. So it's the Public Assistance Program. There's over 3,000 policies that you may need to wade through, but the actual CFR is FEMA Disaster Assistance Public Assistance Program.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you. So how many things are listed out exactly? And I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time doing this. I just want to know if I can find a list and it'll give me the 30 things that are included. But if it's a lot of pages,
that's in the CFR.
Okay.
And that's in the federal?
In the federal, yeah, 44 CFR.
Thank you.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question may be, I'm just asking for clarification, please, if to the author, if electric co-ops are included. You may have answered this, and I just don't understand or didn't hear this. And if rural electric companies, is that two separate entities?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Pelowski.
Respond to the technicalities of this.
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pugh, municipal utilities are eligible. Rural electric co-ops are eligible under the FEMA 75%, but not under the state public assistance. And that really is only a financial implication, because the costs to repair the distribution system are mammoth. And if we had those costs, we very likely would qualify for federal disaster declaration.
Representative Pepin. Representative Pugh first. Do you have Representative Pepin.
I was just going to follow up on that, Mr. Chair. So the eligibility says that if it's eligible under FEMA's public assistance program, it's eligible. And so when Representative Pugh asked that, you said that the rural electric cooperatives are included there, so that means they are included? They are eligible?
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pepin, I believe it's in the definitions section of that this is for local government.
Article 2.
Mr. Shepherd, maybe you can grant some clarity.
Mr. Chair, and I'd ask Ms. Heidi to, I think what she's referring to, there's two criteria. You have to be an applicant, as defined in the bill, and it has to be for an eligible cost. An applicant on page 5, lines 16 to 17, means only a local government. And then on the top of page 7, you can see, for example, it talks about an applicant's share of eligible costs. So I think they both, as I understand it, you'd have to meet both.
So then no is the answer?
Representative, so we're talking, so I get it straight in my head here, we're talking local municipal, that are owned by the municipality, they would be covered, but the local co-ops that are not municipal owned would not be covered. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct.
Does that Representative Pepin, Pugh, does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment and follow up on Representative Falk's question. Representative Pelowski, I think, worked with me on this in 2012, and Director Heidi and her office did too, but we did write similar language to that which is in this bill on line 6.5. Damages suffered and eligible costs incurred are the direct result of the disaster. So the language is covered well in the bill and is also occurs in section 12 or chapter 12A. Thank you.
Members, any more questions on the bill? Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my questions on line 6.28 and 29, would lobbyist expenses also be ineligible?
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen, they are not eligible unless it lobbyists. No, it would not be eligible.
And Mr. Chair, Ms. Heidi, is that implied or is that explicit?
Ms. Heidi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen, it would be implied because there is eligibility under direct administrative costs. But lobbyist would not be considered direct administrative costs. It would be indirect administrative costs, therefore ineligible. And that is also in the program manual, not in law.
Representative Hansen.
Mr. Chair, on line 6.28, after the word employees, I'd move to insert the word comma, lobbyists, and the word lobbyists, comma, and the word lobbyists.
Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any problem with inserting lobbyists here. I think it's already covered. Well, I think the room's full of them, but...
I was being funny. Is there any lobbyists here would object? But Representative Hansen moves that on line 3.28, after employees, insert comma, lobbyists. Is that the proper motion, Mr. Shepherd?
Mr. Chair, I just have a question, Mr. Shepherd. When we insert lobbyists in there, we have a definition of lobbyists in statute?
Mr. Shepherd.
Mr. Chair and members, no. There is a definition of lobbyists in Chapter 10A, but that applies to Chapter 10A.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Shepherd, I'm going to ask you another question. Looking back at Rushford, they lobbied extensively for a special session. They weren't paid lobbyists, but certainly they were lobbying. If we insert the word lobbyists in here, are we telling a community like Rushford when they're actually petitioning the state? I know it says costs, and I'm not saying costs covered, but it seems to open a door here where They were producing flyers, they had hand-painted signs, they had a number of things. I know it wasn't covered under the flood reimbursement, but
Representative Hansen.
Mr. Chair, I think the way to correct that would be, say, lobbyist as defined under 10A.
all right. Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen, I'm
Representative-
going to go with Mark Shepard again, Mr. Shepard, but I think there has to be some way of limiting this to, I know what your intent is.
Representative Pelowski and Representative Hansen, I'm going to pull your motion for the amendment. I would ask you to work on this with Mr. Shepard between this and the next committee stop and try and define that, because again, I think we've got problems here with this. We may be opening it up, and I think this is the one that we need to make sure we get the right meaning to the right words we're putting in here. Representative Pelowski, does that sound good for you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Representative Kahn.
No, I was just going to suggest the 10A reference.
Anybody in the audience that needs to speak for or against this bill? Seeing no one rushing here to the microphones, I will renew my motion that House File 2701, as amended, be re-referred to the Committee on Public Safety, Finance, and Policy. All those in favor of the amendment, or the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion passes. The bill will be referred. Thank you, Representative Pelowski. And members, I'm going to go to the Dill bill. Do we got the amendment? Representative Dill, let me get my stuff together here. House File 2715. And members, on the memo that we've got on this, the parts of the bill that apply to us are Section 4 on page 2, Section 11 on page 11, and the repealers. So, Representative Dill.
Mr. Chairman, I move the bill, and I'd like to have the motion to go to the General Register, and I'm going to accomplish that by a couple of oral amendments. The first...
Is this what's being passed out here?
I believe so, yes. Would you like to wait? Here with us is PCA, Bowser, Ms. Stroman, Mr. Meyer, Mr. Kudelka from DNR to ask any technical questions on the bill. The first amendment appears on page 11. In the repealers, section 18. On line 1.12, it starts laws 2010, chapter 215. It would be to strike all the language on 11.12 and 11.13. That would be the first oral amendment. And that... You got to talk. I'm sorry. On line 1.12, it would be strike from laws 2010, chapter 215, article 3, section 5, subdivisions 4.
So that's through the first semicolon.
That's correct. I'm sorry. I had highlighted the whole line.
Is that, Mr. Shepard, is that what's written on?
Yes. Okay, we got that correct? That'd be my motion.
Representative Skowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That would leave two ands back to back, Mr. Chair, so you may want to strike an and on one side or the other.
Mr. Shepard, can you...
Or is that something the reviser can fix?
Yes.
We can let the revisers fix that. That's, so we don't have to say bye-bye to the and. Anyway, Representative Dill, everybody have that amendment? Or all in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's adopted.
And the next oral amendment, Mr. Chairman, is section 16, begins on page 8, line 8.26, and continues through 10.33 on page 10, and it would be delete that section. and that's just a fiscal matter that eliminates from going, those two things eliminate it from going to Environment Finance, and then it can go directly to the floor. We've talked to the chair of the Environment Finance Committee, and she's in agreement with that.
So members, you understand the amendment. We're deleting Section 16 from the bill. All in favor of the amendment to delete Section 16, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
And, Mr. Chairman,
The ayes have it. The motion's adopted.
and obviously there is a fiscal note in the packet, and so that slightly changed the note, even though that isn't before us. I just referenced that would, because of those two actions, it would slightly change that. Not that we're here to talk about it, I just bring it up as a matter of record.
So Representative Dill, what does your bill do now that we've sliced and diced it?
This is unsession for PCA Bowser and the DNR. One of my favorite bills, actually. I'd like to do more, but...
Representative Dill, I know in a lot of the ones there was people wanted to do more and were on session bills, and they got scaled down because of objections from many people from many areas. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And because Representative Dill would like to do more, I have an amendment to put in an unsession type of bill that we've heard in this committee already. It's passed out of this committee. It was that county commissioners cannot be drainage inspectors. So it has moved through this committee, and it's moved through the environment. And I would move the amendment, A1 amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have already reviewed the amendment, and I'm okay with the amendment.
And Representative Hansen, this was what was the House file that we heard in committee here?
I have a lot of bills, Mr. Chair, but we passed it out of here in environment policy.
It was Bill something, 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 something.
Ms. Dyson.
Ms. Dyson. Anyway, it was a bill that we did here, dealing with the county inspector. Yeah, the county commissioners could not be inspectors for the drainage systems. And Representative Dill, you said that you're in favor, you're okay with this amendment?
Yes, and we had it in our committee as well, in the Environment Natural Resources Policy, and it passed out there on a voice vote.
So Representative Hansen, and the only reason I'm accepting this out of the 24-hour, we've already heard this bill and passed it out. So Representative Hansen moves that what's listed as the 2715A1 amendment. Questions on the amendment? Representative Pepin shaking her head. Anybody? All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Oh, come on, you voted for it when it went out of here.
The amendment is adopted. Representative Dill.
I have no testimony that I would like to give.
Okay.
I'm willing to answer questions or get the resource folks up here to answer the question.
I have a question for Representative Kahn.
Yeah, one question, on the repeal is 84.53, the topographic survey. Is that totally covered by other things?
I see Mr. Meyer
He's coming.
wandering down to the microphone. Welcome to our committee, and please state your name for the tape. And
Mr. Chairman, members, for the record, Bob Meyer, Department of Natural Resources. Let me just get to that section here.
Representative Kahn, do you want to repeat so I can find it also?
It's 4R. 84.53 in the repeal. 4R.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members, at 84.53, it also relates to 84.55, Cooperation of County and Municipality. These sections provide for topographic surveys of the state, and 84.55 provides for the support of the surveys by counties and municipalities as needed. These topographical surveys have been completed, and the language dates back to 1949.
I think that's even
Of
before.
course, I remembered it from that.
And Representative Kahn was in the legislature at that time. No.
No, but I was interested in topographic surveys at that time. Mr. Chairman.
Representative Kahn.
Also, 85.015 on the state trails.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kahn, this segment of the trail is actually part of the Gateway and Browns Creek Trail, which is part of the overall Willard-Munger Trail within the state.
Great.
Representative Kahn. That's it. Any other questions?
I have a question, Mr. Meyer, when your time.
Okay. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Dill, it seems like the bill doesn't do much of anything except for perhaps Section 7, so maybe you or Mr. Meyer could explain what Section 7 does?
On page 3.
Yeah, that would be a Ms. Stroman answer. Is she still here?
Ms. Stroman, welcome to our committee.
And
Please state your name for the record again and proceed with your testimony, or proceed with answering.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sarah Stroman. I'm the Acting Deputy Director at the Board of Water and Soil Resources. To Representative Pepin's question on Section 7, this section of the bill is to help streamline and make the process of consolidating soil and water conservation districts more efficient by removing a threshold that requires a citizen petition and referendum. That threshold is, in most cases, impractical and an inefficient way to have districts consolidate if they wish to do that voluntarily. It's to promote shared services between soil and water conservation districts. What this would do then is have the SWCD supervisors file a petition with the board and have the board make that decision, as we do with other water management entities such as watershed districts and watershed management organizations. So it's making this consistent with other similar types of entities.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it makes it a little bit harder, then, for citizens to weigh in?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Pepin, it does remove the citizen petition and referendum process to get the process initiated. There still is a comment period, so citizens can weigh in through a comment period, and they can also request a hearing process before the board. So there's still ample opportunity for citizens to weigh in on the process.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you. That's fine. I do have just kind of one general question for Representative Dill.
Representative Dill.
I'm wondering if anything in this bill, I see there's a lot of stuff that talks about eliminating outdated language and whatnot. I'm wondering if there's anything in this bill that saves the state any money or sunsets any active board, commission, agency, or if it's pretty much just deleting some lines from that we haven't looked at for years anyway.
Representative Dill.
the amendments that I did earlier in the committee does save a small amount of money for the state, the two oral amendments that I did. And there, to my knowledge, there are no boards that are sunsetted. It just basically deletes obsolete language.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Dill, do you know about how much money it saves? Just a ballpark?
$321,000.
Thank you.
Would be a change on the fiscal note.
Thanks.
Representative Khan.
On 12R, 16C.712, and this is the federal high-level radioactive waste disposal. And one of the things is that there is an expiration. It is when the Department of Energy eliminates Minnesota from further siting considerations for disposal of high-level radioactive waste. And I recall recently reading an article that said Minnesota was going to come right back into that. So, you know, since this does have, and the thing that it seemed to be reasonable to take out of that is, you know, the office. We don't have an Office of Strategic and Long-Range Planning anymore, do we?
Mr. Kudelka.
Might be reasonable to fix that, but Mr. Kudelka.
Mr. Kudelka.
Mr. Chair and committee members, for the record, my name is Kirk Kudelka, an Assistant Commissioner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. 116C.712 actually is a left behind. That could probably be deleted from this bill. You will see it again in another bill later today, House File 1864, which deals with a number of advisory committees. Initially, the agencies had their advisory committee bill recommendations in this also, but since there were others already moving on the process, we stripped it out.
Well, I'm not interested in where it is. I'm interested in, is it clear that we don't need it? Is it clear that Minnesota is not going to be, has this act occurred, that the Department of Energy has eliminated Minnesota for further siting conditions for disposal of high-level radioactive waste?
Mr. Kudelka.
Mr. Chair and committee members, we can get you the date, but it has occurred. The Nuclear Waste Commission should have been repealed by that language in subdivision 2 previously, and we can get you the date in a second here.
Well, how?
It was 1987 when that occurred by the federal government.
Representative Khan.
How was it done? By what kind of act? And what's to stop it from being reinserted?
Representative, or Mr. Kudelka.
Okay.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I've got it in another folder. I can get it. I know this will be up in another bill later today, this exact piece, and I can have that ready for that point if you'd like.
That'd be great. And if it's at some time in the future, when this bill gets heard on the floor, if we don't get the right answer, I'm sure Representative Khan can make an amendment on the floor to reinsert that, or to delete that from the bill, which would leave it in state law. Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for Acting Deputy Director Stroman. If I could pose a question and actually express my concern about the lack of citizens' ability with this Section 7 to petition. And I'm wondering how many petitions, say, in the last year have been brought, or in the last couple of years, have been brought before before Bowser. And
Stroman.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, on this particular for consolidation of districts, to my knowledge, none in recent history. The issue is that really the consolidation or the issue of sharing services across soil and water districts boundary is really less of an issue of concern for citizens as it is for the supervisors who are trying to administer the operations of the district. And so that's why we don't typically see them come forward, and that's why the threshold is impractical in most cases. And so the thought here is to make this process similar to the process we have for watershed districts and other watershed management organizations, allow the supervisors to petition the board, and then allow citizens to participate through a comment period or a requested hearing process.
Representative Pugh.
yes, so I have just one follow-up question in general. So obviously, if a petition was there and then the threshold was 100 signatures, is that my understanding? That each one of those could see and be aware that there, is a petition going and know that they're, one of 100 that are actually, submitting that petition. So I'm wondering if in a process like that, just in general, and now with the comment, citizens can still comment. So I'm wondering if those citizens can see one another's comments, or is it just the one citizen coming directly to Bowser with their comment and then Bowser considering those comments, or do all the citizens see everyone else's comments that have been posted? Just looking for a clarification in general about the process.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and committee members, so the process we're proposing here is not instituted for this yet, but the idea would be that any individual citizen could comment during a public, that comment period is publicly noticed, and it's a public comment period. So, those comments are available as that process goes through the board's decision-making process. So comments would be available, but it is different than the 100 people petitioning and seeing 100 other 99 other names on a list.
So my last question is,
Mr. Pugh.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So would those say there were 100 comments that were made, would each of those 100 commenters see the other 99 commenters at some point? Could they request that information, or is it accessible without making a request?
Ms. Stroman.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Pugh, so the 100 was the names on the petition. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're proposing to eliminate, is that threshold on the petition. Now it would just be comments coming forward during a publicly noticed comment period.
So, Ms. Stroman, by eliminating the 100, we're actually making it easier for citizens to contact the Bowser board or the Bowser people. They wouldn't have to get 99 other people to bring a petition forward. By making these comments, if there's enough of them, the board could institute the process. Is that what I'm hearing or reading, or am I wrong?
Mr. Chair, what the process would be now is it would be the supervisors from the elected supervisors from the Soil and Water Conservation District that would petition the Bowser Board. So it's not a citizen petition coming to the Bowser Board, it's a petition from the Soil and Water District supervisors coming to the Bowser Board that would trigger a public comment period as the board goes through its decision-making process that would be open to the public.
Representative Pugh.
Yeah, thank you. That's fine.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a clarifying question for Representative Dill. I'd asked you how much your bill, as amended, would save the state, and you said $321,000 because of your oral amendments. And I'm looking at the $11,000 savings makes sense, but the other one, it looks like you're just putting back into current law what you were going to take out in your amendment, so it would have no impact whatsoever. So really, your bill would save $11,000. Is that right?
That actually be the correct analysis, but that would be the correct analysis.
Thank you.
There were $321,000 in money transacting here, and $11,000 would be the actual net savings to the state.
Great, thanks.
Anybody from the audience that needs to speak for or against this bill? If not, Representative Dill renews his motion. This was amended.
Yes.
That House File 2715 as amended be the floor now? Be re-referred to the General Register. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion's approved. The motion's approved. The bill's re-referred. Members, we're going to recess now till after session and to the call of the chair. And members, we're going to do it till the call of the chair. We're going to be meeting in session. My understanding is we're going to caucus, and then we'll figure out after caucus if we're going to be going back in right away. We'll figure out what we're going to do. If we're going to be a long recess, we'll come back and get some of our work done. So members,
Oh, yes.
we'll post on the website, and we'll send out notices. So members, watch your emails, and we'll go forward there. So with that, members, we're in recess.